Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show, we're talking about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Season 1 of The Umbrella Academy. So, obviously with these type of things, I'm going to start off non-spoilerish and then get into the spoiler stuff, but I'll tell you clearly when I'm getting into the spoiler stuff. But generally, how did I feel about the season? I thought it was great. This is, also coming from someone who went into this not knowing anything about the series. Like, the only thing I knew was from what I saw in the trailer. It's also kind of cool, like I talked about this before, like finding out, like, oh yeah, Jared Way from My Chemical Romance, it's one of the people behind it. He's like, I think he wrote the comic book, but someone else did the art for it, but that this series is based on. So it's just kind of interesting in that way. But in general, how I really enjoyed it. I think it's kind of nice. This dysfunctional group, this family has to be the ones that kind of save the world. And it's kind of interesting because there's certain things kind of, even with things that I kind of felt like, oh, I'm wondering, is it going to be that? And it turned out to be that. Certain events didn't play out the way I thought they would. They did to certain extents, but at other times they kind of flipped stuff on their heads. There's a lot of stuff that I kind of went into this thinking it was one thing, but then turned out to be something else entirely. So it's just kind of interesting. So, I mean, it's well worth it. Like, if you're looking for like a dysfunctional family with superpowers and just kind of this crazy messed up tale of trying to save the world, it's kind of interesting because it's not even just about saving the world, it's also about dealing with their messed up family issues. That's the big crux of the show, and they do such an interesting job with it. Obviously I'll go more into that when I talk about spoilers, but if you have not seen it, I highly recommend you check it out. I think it is well worth your time. So now that I've got all the non-spoiler stuff out of the way, going forward, I will be going into spoilers. Once again, with this type of thing, I talk about things in whatever fashion I want to. So a lot of times, I'm all over the place. So don't expect like me to kind of go into everything in some chronological order. I'll just talk about it as it comes to me. So do keep that in mind. Okay, so breaking some stuff down I thought was kind of interesting. Maybe I missed this detail in the trailer, but I thought it was only the 7 that were born on the same day. It's like, no, there was like 43 births at the same time, and apparently Reginald went around and tried to buy all the babies off. Only 7 of them, he was only able to get 7 of the 43, so it's like, what about the other 36? I guess technically 35 because I can't remember, like, I know he was born on the same day, the whole Harold situation. Like I said, I'll kind of go into that later on, obviously, but was he born at the same time or a different time? I'm not really sure. Either way, so he might count as that, but it's like, that's so interesting because that's something we never dabbled into. It's like, well, what about the, other 35 or 36, give or take, it's like, what about them? Did they never develop abilities? Because no matter what, the Umbrella Academy were such, in their spotlight and everything, so maybe there were other people in the world, maybe their powers just never developed. Like, I don't know, maybe they were just normal people too. It just, maybe there's more to this, because that's something that's kind of left unexplained. Like, how did they get their powers? I mean, is that something they'll ever explain at all? It'll just be like, it happened, get over it. You don't need to know everything. It's just one of those things I'm curious about. But the fact is, that's really interesting. That was only those 7, but I also think it's interesting too that their biological parents never came into the story either. And I guess maybe that's for a reason. It's kind of like, oh yeah, you cut all ties with your family and everything, like the moment the child is bought and everything in that regard. But it's still kind of like, I'm curious to see will anything ever come of that or not. Maybe not. Like I said, maybe it's kind of the same thing of like, why do you have powers? Why did this all happen? Ignore that. It might be that type of thing of just kind of like the details aren't that important. It is what it is type of thing. So a lot of interesting things. Like another thing was like the whole 5 situation. I love that he's literally the only one that never got a name. But I guess in the grand scheme of things, it kind of makes sense maybe. Well, because he might not have been around when Mom gave everybody else names. Because I can't remember if she was around. I think she was. Yeah, she definitely was around when he was still around. So but he was just the only one that never got a name. It's actually kind of sad because like, it's like, oh, why do we have numbers? Because Dad couldn't even bother to give us names. Mom had to be the one to give us names. And you know how sad and kind of messed up that is, considering the fact is Mom is a robot and she shows more emotion and connection to the children than their own father does. But the argument could be made, it's like, well, everything she does and feels is kind of a reflection of what he feels. Like anything he tells her to say isn't just, it's because maybe he himself wasn't able to say it, so he had Mom say and do the things that he couldn't do, just maybe he just wasn't built that way, like we do kind of learn later on that Reginald lost someone that he was important to him, so maybe that loss kind of made him a little distant. But also in the grand scheme of things, it's like, oh, everything I'm doing is for the purpose of, well, I'll dive into it more later on, but it's like, oh yeah, like obviously like everything I did, all the kind of borderline cruelty and torture I administered to these kids. It's like it was all for the purpose of preparing you to save the world in the long run. So there's that aspect to it as well. Which is also something too, like we dived a little bit into Reginald's past, but there was still a lot unanswered about that. Because at first I was like, I mean, maybe that was me completely missing that, but the lights and everything, I'm like, wait, are you aliens or something? That's what I was thinking, but maybe I was like, nah, maybe I'm just being stupid. But it just seemed like that wasn't on Earth. That looked like a different planet or something. Maybe, I don't know. Like I said, maybe I'm completely utterly stupid on that. But like, it just, especially because he had that jar of light and stuff like that. Maybe that's all connected, but it's just like a one bit part of an episode, and then it just disappears. So it's like maybe that's something for the future. Nevertheless, getting back to the point I was going to make, about 5 that was interesting. I did not realize he was going to live in the, like I knew he jumped to the future, like I saw the trailer and everything, did not realize he lived there. I thought it was kind of like, oh, he accidentally popped there and then he popped back, because I thought like maybe that was part of his ability and stuff like that, the reason why he was so young. It's like, no, he actually ages. It's just like when he came back to present day, he ended up reverting back into a 13-year-old again. So that was kind of interesting to me. I was like, that's all so fascinating, having lived in an post-apocalyptic world like that for so long. I mean, he was there. Wasn't it like 40? He said like, I think he said like 45 or 46 years he was there. So he was like, that's crazy, to think about. Also, the Dolores situation is kind of like, it's like, oh, he had someone Dolores and everything, and he meets her later, and I was like, oh, the mannequin. It's like, because he went and found her present day. It's like, that's kind of sweet and sad. Like, there's a dark humor to that, because it's like, it's a little sweet. I mean, she was a mannequin and everything, sure, but she got him through the apocalypse. I mean, it's like, when you're kind of alone and have no one, it's like, everyone needs their, Geez, I'm about to make a reference to Castaway, but Wilson. Geez, I've never actually seen Castaway, so it's messed up for me to do that. But like, it's that pop culture thing that like the reference, even though you don't know the movie that well. Like the whole Luke is Darth Vader is Luke's father. It's like, I'm not that familiar with Star Wars, but that's one of those things, pop culture things, you just can't help that. Nevertheless, I'm going on a huge tangent. But that was kind of interesting. And to find out he's coming back only a few days back in time to try and stop it. Also, the fact is he was an assassin, that there's this whole group known as the Commission, like going through time, trying to make sure the balance between keeping the time space continuum going while also allowing for free will was such an interesting thing. And it's like it's almost like a corporation, in particular, kind of almost like a I don't know how to phrase it. Yeah, a corporation would just be it, like that's deciding that and doing all that, which that's something we still have to dive into. I feel like we only scratched the surface on the Commission, because it's like the person we dealt with the most was the handler, but even she was just like, I guess you made the argument middle management. She seemed like she was Five's boss, but the fact of the matter is she had superiors that she had to answer to. So it's like, who are they and what their whole situation is? That's interesting and all on his own. I also love the fact is that Five is his legend. I mean, he was very, very good at his job. Interestingly enough, like obviously the whole Cha-Cha and Hazel situation. I love like him worried at the beginning wearing that thing to help with his wrist and everything, because they were because he had to carry the suitcase all the time, and just like back and forth between him and Cha-Cha, which is so dope. Cha-Cha being played by Mary J. Blige. The actor who plays Hazel seems so familiar. I just can't place it. I need to look that up, but he looks so familiar. I definitely seen him in something, but I just can't place it. But nevertheless, I do love like later on when Cha-Cha was kind of like, come on, think about what we do. We get to go to exotic places, we get to meet people, and then we get to kill them. And it's just kind of like, that's kind of like her selling point for the job and stuff like that, to, trying to change Hazel's mind, which I love that you could tell from the very beginning that the whole him and Agnes thing, which is kind of sweet and everything. It's just because for him, it's like he appreciates kind of like the mundane moments of life just because of like the job that they have and everything. And him growing tired of it and everything was so neat, and it caused the animosity between him. Like part of me wondered if it was like, did Cha-Cha kind of secretly have a thing for Hazel? Like the moment he saw, it's like, oh, when she saw Hazel making out with Agnes, is like, oh crap. Like I thought that's what it was. I was like, maybe she likes him, but it's like, no, it's because it's like, you're my partner, we're in this together, and the fact of the matter is that's all this was about, you getting laid. I also love them torturing or trying to beat information out of Klaus, and he's just laughing because it's like, you've literally wasted 10 hours torturing me and you got nothing. And the fact is that they started eating his stuff and kind of ended up ultimately getting high. Because he was basically like, yeah, you guys, you idiots, you kidnapped the wrong person. No one's literally going to know that I'm missing, which they literally don't know until Diego gets that message, be like, oh yeah, like Patch found the people who got your brother. What? Well, we've got 5. Klaus is like, no one literally noticed he was going. He literally said that. It is like, and no one tells me anything, so you grabbed the wrong brother in the end. So that was kind of interesting. Which, side note, that Patch thing was so heartbreaking. Like, I was like, the moment she was like calling Diego for backup, I'm like, she's not going to wait this shit. And it's just like, oh, that sucks, dude. Because obviously, like, that's so interesting too. Because like, I feel like typically storyline wise, you would expect her to be around a little bit, you know, a little bit, maybe a little bit more between her and Diego over the course of the season. Maybe near the end of the season, kill her. It's like, not right off the bat. Kill her. It's like, Jesus, we even had that much with her, because I thought she'd be much deeper into the investigation, because obviously all the bodies that are dropping, because all that's connected to 5 and stuff like that, which I'll kind of get to that in a second. But it's just so heartbreaking that the whole Patch thing happened the way it is. Also sucks that Diego gets framed for her murder because his prints are all over the place. Side note, that actress looks so familiar too. I hate that when I feel like I recognize an actor or an actress and I just can't place him. She's another one too. I feel like I've seen her in something, but I can't place it. I'm pretty sure, I could be wrong about this, but the actor who played her partner, Beeman, isn't that the same actor who played, and his name Diego? It's been so long since I've seen him from the TV show The Listener. Like, he pops up like season 2 on. He was like one of the other people that Toby worked with. But I'm trying to remember. I want to say his character's name was Diego, but I could be 100% wrong. But going back to what I was bringing up earlier, the whole 5 situation. About, it's interesting with 5 because it's like, and I think this kind of applies to the entire show, and I think it's such an interesting thing. If everyone had talked, none of this would have kind of fallen apart to the way they did. But even when they did talk, nothing got solved because they are that messed up as a family. It's like they don't want to listen to each other. Like poor Vanya is kind of like the runt of the family because she was ordinary, and then it's kind of like, because you had Diego being like, you could have gotten yourself killed or someone else. Like, I think legitimately in his own way, I interpret that as him being looking out. I just went, oh, that's sweet, because he's like, you could have been killed, but then he was like, or gotten someone else killed, you're a liability. I was like, okay, that was a bit dickish. But I think legitimately he was trying to look out for her, because it's like, no matter what, you are still my sister. But it's kind of sad because Vanya is like, she's literally the black sheep of the family, even more so because she wrote a book like exposing everything about the family. Family didn't appreciate that one bit, kind of putting their dirty business out there. So, and it doesn't even seem like she got that famous off of it either, you know? It's like, you know, being, you know, being number 7, you know, amongst the Umbrella Academy. It is also interesting too, kind of breaking down everybody's abilities. I guess straight from the beginning, like, you know, Luther's whole situation was just a superhuman strength, but, you know, his dad had no right, you know, Reginald had no right sending him out on that mission alone. It's like, you literally had driven the rest of your kids away, and Luther kind of stayed there because, you know, he's like the loyal son, but in the long run, he ends up kind of figuring out later, I was like, yeah, I kind of stayed because I pushed you guys away. Like, I could have left with you. But for him to end up the way he did, like, because I was like, because I noticed it at first when, like, Diego slashed his arm, you kind of saw a little hair poking through. I was like, what is that? I was like, wait, what? I was like, and then you see his body later on. I'm like, is he stuck looking like a werewolf or something? Like, is that? I said, then I saw his chest and everything. I was like, wait, did they surgically attach his head to a gorilla's body? It's like, no, like, that's his natural body that turned into that because his dad was trying to save his life using a serum. I guess there was no reversing it after it was all said and done, but it's like, oh man, that sucks. And apparently he had hid it from every single one of his siblings. Because, I mean, I'm sure all of them hadn't seen him in years. I mean, to be fair, he was living on the moon for 4 years, but it's like, there was that 3-year period in between there where he was still the only one left there. The accident happened, that happened to him, so I guess he never got in contact with the others. I mean, why would he? They weren't really that, you know, like, once again, the whole not communicating with each other, but he was going to communicate even less because he won't want anyone, especially Allison, because he thought Allison had already moved on, had a life and everything, which she's in this complicated situation of like, hey, I have a daughter, but my ex-husband's filing for divorce and custody, because it turns out because of her ability, and I thought it was kind of interesting, like, basically I heard a rumor, and because of that, it's almost like I wish, but it's I heard a rumor and it becomes true, and she kept using the power on her little girl. Side note, it's interesting too because we don't know how far that ability could be pushed, because I feel like even in this season, like, I mean, they kind of hint at it, like a lot of people's powers are just on the cusp of, you know, because even Klaus, like, later on kind of advances his abilities. I mean, and that's kind of understandable why Klaus ended up in the mess that he did, because it's like he took all those drugs and stuff because he was trying to keep the ghost out of his head, because, you know, his dad locked him up in like a mausoleum like that. And was like, oh yeah, face your fear of the dead. It's like, geez, he was like 13, and it's like, no wonder he stays high all the time and stuff like that. 5 being in the situation that he's in. Once again, like, if you just talked, like, explain everything. To be fair, he did tell Vanya, but she didn't really believe him. But to be fair, it's like he never really tried. Then, like, the whole joining up with Klaus, I love that whole thing, trying to get information from that doctor, and Klaus is like, how dare you lay hands on my son? And he's like, what? And he's like, yeah, give him the swollen lip. What swollen lip? Slap. And then it, like, Bat breaks that whole globe over his own head too, just to prove a point. It's like, jeez, Klaus is crazy. And all that was for like $20 too, because of what he was going to get from 5. I also love later on, before he was kind of like, okay, what's our backstory? It's like, I was super young and naive, and like, and your mother, that slut, whoever she was. I was like, okay, that's interesting. Also, their mom, that was kind of interesting. Like, at first it seemed, I was like, wait, is she sick or something? But then the moment, like, it took a little bit, but I was like, isn't she the exact same age from when you were kids? Like, what's up with that? And it's like, oh, when Diego said she needs to recharge, he literally meant she has to recharge. It's actually kind of interesting because she's actually, Vanya's actually the reason why Grace exists, because Vanya did the whole thing, I'm assuming, killing all her nannies, and Reginald was just like, Vanya. No, or did he say, like, no, he says number 7, because he never called them by their names. He always called them by their numbers. But it's like number 7 each and every time. And then Grace came about, and it's like, oh, finally someone she can't kill. So it seems like that was the ultimate reason for her coming to be. So, because it's interesting, because at the beginning when all the babies were adopted, it seemed like there were a whole bunch of nannies. I guess that was just the beginning when they were infants, so that's why you needed them. But, the moment they grew up, they eventually, I guess he wanted someone specifically for 7, but I guess, like, in the long run, it's kind of like, oh, Grace kind of became multi-purpose for everybody, so. To me, I thought was kind of an interesting thing, the back-to-back episodes, like, the day that didn't exist and the day that did exist. I thought that was so genius, like how those work together like that. It's kind of like, oh, what happened before 5 came back and changed everything? That was the whole Allison and Luther thing, like them finally kind of getting together after so long, like, came to so many realizations. Like Vanya ended up finding out about Leonard to a certain extent earlier on. Mom was having a conversation with Diego about stuff that, like, Pogo was lying, her and Pogo were lying about, and it's like, I'm assuming it was going to be about their dad's situation, about the whole, like, oh, he actually killed himself, because it's like, wait, what? And it's like, yeah, just for the purpose of trying to bring them together. And even Klaus was like, geez, Dad, you never do anything the easy way. You got to go the most extreme way. But it's like, in the long run, it worked, but I mean, still. Like I said, it's just like this family had such shitty communication with each other. To be fair, like, it's not the most welcoming environment. It kind of like, the way their dad kind of, broke them down like that and everything. Once again, it was all for the purpose of saving the world, but still, he didn't have to be an asshole about it. It's kind of, I'm sure, the consensus everybody kind of felt. And since I was talking about him, the Leonard thing, to me, I was kind of like on and off. Like, from the beginning, I was like, I don't know, man. It felt like Leonard was trying too hard. But then eventually I'm like, oh, maybe he is a good guy. But then you got to that point where it's like, Allison found him in Vanya's apartment. I'm like, oh no, he's most likely there picking up her violin that she had left and everything. I thought that's what he was doing, and he was like, oh no, I came to drop off the keys, and oh, embarrassing, I went to the bathroom. I'm like, you're lying, what are you doing? And it turns out like, oh, he left the flowers. I'm like, oh, maybe there's something to it. Like legitimately, when he was pouring her pills out before we saw that, I was like, don't tell me he's like a cannibal or something. Just like he's pouring out her pills. I'm like, okay. So I was like, okay, so you're like a stalker, like got like a fatal attraction type of thing. For him, I thought like, okay, you're trying to make her better, which he was. It's just a situation of I was like, okay, you're some obsessed dude that's trying to make her better and everything like that. You're familiar with the Umbrella Academy and all that. So I was like, okay, so you're just trying to, because you're doing what you think is best for her, which it is. But in the long run, it's like the twist is like, oh no, like his story being what it is, and it's like, jeez. And also, because it didn't correlate in my head that like, oh yeah, he's the one-eyed man that Five was warning about. And it's so interesting because it's like, it wasn't until his head turned, because I figured it out with her powers and everything. I'm like, okay, Harold is the reason why this is all going to go down. So he's going to be like, I knew that Vanya was going to be the instrument, but I figured he was the one kind of playing things out. But it's kind of sad, because if Reginald wasn't such an asshole to him back then, who's to say? That's always a thing of like nature versus nurture. I mean, to be fair, his situation was kind of sad. His dad was a drunk, abusive asshole. But the fact of the matter is, if he was welcomed into the Umbrella Academy, which to say wouldn't have been great anyway. He actually had no powers and stuff like that. I mean, Vanya kind of got treated the same way. Maybe Vanya would have been a little bit different off. I mean, to be fair, she had powers. She just didn't remember that she had powers. I was wondering about it. I was like, yeah, you didn't have any memories of like him testing out your powers and then why didn't you? Oh, because he used Allison to do it, and it kind of pisses Vanya off. But it's like, to be fair, like, you know, Allison was 4 years old, and you know, she didn't really understand what was all happening. It's like she was told that you were sick, and your dad was like, oh yeah, say this one thing, just do it. And it's just kind of like, but that's why she's always been so ordinary, and just kind of, you know, that helped push her away from the rest of her family, made her feel more like an outcast. And her dad did it because he knew the potential of how dangerous her power could be. And it's so interesting too, because I was like, they made such a point to focus on the pill she kept taking. I was like, what is that about? I was like, is that related to, I was like, because I had a feeling, I was like, is that supposed to be something like doling her powers? Something? It's like, lo and behold, it is, because her powers are connected to her emotions. The more heightened her emotions are, her mood actually is actually kind of interesting, because it almost seems like her powers could legitimately warp reality to a certain extent. Just because, like, it started literally raining when she was in a bad mood, and then she stopped being mad and kind of calmed down a little bit, and the rain disappeared. So it's like, there's something more to that. Like, once again, it's like everyone's power has got levels to it, because Klaus could talk to the dead and everything like that. I mean, to be fair, he has to be sober to summon them up. But then the whole situation of, like, later on what he discovers with Ben is the whole thing. Now, that was an interesting thing, too. Like, I said, I've seen the dude in the black coat when he gets first introduced. I'm like, who the hell is this? And it's like, it's Ben. I'm like, yo! Which that's so sad too. It's like, I mean, we don't know what exactly went down, but I can only assume it was because of his powers. Because, you know, because I think Five had brought it up to Vanya, asking her about, you know, Ben, and it was kind of like, yeah, it was brutal. You know, it was kind of a terrible way to go. I think that was with between Five and Vanya, that whole conversation. So, but it seems like his power was kind of shape-shifting, I'm assuming. We never got to fully see it, but we did kind of get pieces of it, like, it doesn't seem like it was necessarily like maybe like not necessarily a full-on Beast Boy type of thing, but kind of similar. But it seemed like he could summon. I don't know if the tentacles were the only thing he could summon. Maybe that's the only form he could take, because I don't think he ever took any other form, at least that we're aware of. You know, maybe that was the only thing he could do. Maybe not. I don't know, because that's the only thing he does later on. So who knows? It is kind of interesting. I do like that being this weird dynamic for Klaus, that one of his dead brothers is there kind of like trying to keep him on a straight and narrow, essentially. Because for him, it's like, dude, I'm sitting here watching you waste your life. The one thing I can never have, and you're sitting here wasting it away. He's like, I'm not going to sit here and watch my brother do that. So, because it also seemed interesting, too, because he never made a point to tell anyone. I guess because the whole, like, oh, you're kind of a screw-up, so no one's really going to listen to you anyway. He tried to tell them much later on near the end of the season, but they didn't want to listen to him until, like, the time came to be like, yo. So, but his dad had talked about the fact that his ability could go much further than what he was capable of. I did like that he used his powers, you know, thanks to Ben, used his power to talk to all those ghosts, basically all the people that were killed by, Cha-Cha and Hazel, which is interesting. I guess Hazel's thing is like he doesn't like killing women and children, because like he let that wife go and he let a kid go later on. So I think that's kind of his thing. He doesn't like Because, like, when it came down to it, like, Cha-Cha ended up shooting Patch. Like, I feel like, you know, you saw the way, you know, Hazel was looking down, kind of like, oh, he kind of felt bad, you know? But maybe that was just me. I mean, using another example, kind of with the powers and everything, it's like Five traveling through space and then eventually being able to time travel like that's pretty dope. But some other interesting things I didn't expect, like kind of going about the whole Harold route. Like you can tell each time he was going like, no, what's so funny? Like he was getting agitated because the fact is that, you know, Vanya was kind of taking it as a joke. She wasn't being as fully serious about it. Because for him, this was all about his revenge. Because it's kind of interesting. It's kind of like you and me, we're kind of the same. We were kind of ostracized by our fathers. Our fathers were assholes. And it's like to get back at the Umbrella Academy, he was going to use Vanya to do it. Once again, it's just that whole thing of like one thing is built upon each other. Because if, you know, Klaus had never stolen the box to try and sell it to buy drugs and dumped all, like, you know, Reginald's books and papers out, like Harold Leonard would have never found the book and been able to do what he did, you know, manipulating Vanya like that. You know, because it's interesting because, like, her killing him actually took me by surprise because I thought like what was going to ultimately happen is like he keeps stringing her along and everything and then eventually uses her to kind of basically cause the apocalypse. I thought that was going to happen. It's interesting because the timeline had already changed because Five had come back because, you know, because we know that it ends like, because I'm curious like what would have actually happened, what actually went down in the original timeline, like with Five not being there, because obviously like at some point, you know, Luther ends up with the eyeball in his hand. So that means that at some point, you know, Harold was there when it went down before, you know, at whatever point Vanya lost it. Like, was she already kind of like pissed at them and revved up? Or was it something, was it that they learned about the truth about Leonard in whatever case? I don't know. It's hard to say. Like, you know, you can only simply guess at that point in time. Because I guess at the end of the day, it kind of doesn't matter because that matter because the end result is the same because it ended up being Vanya either way. So I was curious to find out like what her power was when she first used it on her like audition for the first chair. The moment Helen didn't pop up, I was like, he killed her, didn't he? And it's like, oh yeah, there she is underneath the plastic in the roof. I was like, oh, that's sad. She was kind of an asshole to, you know, Vanya, but at the same time, you kind of understand like where she was coming from. She was kind of like, the fact of the matter is, find something that you're passionate about. And it's like, oh, she was, you know, it's like she said it in an asshole-ish way, but at the same time, you're like, you can understand her trying to be like, no, like find something you're passionate about and give that your all rather than be, you know, playing the instrument. It's actually kind of interesting because, you know, tying it all together, it's like that belonged to someone that Reginald cared about. And it's like, give this to someone who's going to love it just as much as I did. And he ended up, you know, it kind of seemed like he nonchalantly just gave it to Vanya, but you see him almost kind of perking up, I think, hearing it after all that time, because I think no matter what, he might have been kind of a terrible father in a lot of people's eyes, but the fact of the matter is, I think he cared in his own weird, twisted way. Like, he just probably felt like if he was too loving and too nurturing, they wouldn't be prepared for what's to come. It's a give and take, because it's like, because of him being an asshole, they were prepared to an extent, but it's like, maybe if you put a little bit more love behind it, but I guess maybe Grace, mother, was there to kind of balance that all out too. But also, it's not just like, you know, not talking, it's also like so many damn secrets. Pogo had plenty of him, Grace, as well as, you know, Reginald. Like, there was a lot of damn secrets being kept between everyone. I did appreciate the whole relationship that Allison and Vanya had, because they were just kind of like, you know, it's like they're the only sisters, you know, it's like you're the only sister I have, but they had this very complicated relationship just because it's like they don't know each other. Because even, you know, Allison is like, honestly, I don't know her. She doesn't really know me, you know? And she was trying to make an effort later on, but it just came off the wrong way. Because obviously, Vanya was kind of happy for the first time in her life. She was special to someone, and she didn't want to sacrifice that. Because that's all she's ever wanted, was to feel important, to feel not left out, not to feel like, I mean, with everyone with powers and stuff like that, and her being one with nothing, she felt like the most like a freak amongst her family, you know? And it's just like to be ostracized like that, it takes its toll on you. And I mean, and it's something she's carried her entire life. That's why she kind of wrote the book, because it was just kind of like she's literally staring at a comic book based on. And I love that stuff does that. It's just, I don't know why, that just kind of like, it's just so like meta, just kind of like, oh, literally the show is based on a comic book, and within the show there is a comic book of the TV show. It's just kind of interesting. But the fact is, like, that had to be the last straw, because it's like, it's just a reminder of what your life was, so. But like I said, I was surprised she actually killed Leonard. I was expecting him, because the way he was kind of pushing her like that, I guess he was so aggravated that she wasn't going along with his plans and stuff like that, that he just got frustrated and kind of lost it, and she put an end to that. Also kind of caught me by surprise, because I was like, I figured Allison was going to use her powers on Vanya, but I thought she was going to do it sooner, and she was like, I'm sorry, and I felt like Vanya was going to lose it and her powers would kick in and she'd be able to fight the rumor ability, but it turns out no. Before she could even say anything, Vanya swung the bowstring and slit her throat. I was like, ugh, oh god. I was like, no, that sucks. Luckily, Allison was still alive, but jeez, that sucks. This is what I meant to bring up earlier, about the 5 situation. I kind of lost track of it in my head, but it was like, him not telling you anything was kind of interesting, especially considering the fact is you saw your siblings dead. And he came back kind of acting a little asshole-ish, but I think part of me thinks the reason why he did that was because it's just like, for one, it's like, oh, I come back, and even though you're adults, it's still the same family melodrama bullshit, so there's that. But I think also maybe he felt on some level if he got them involved, they'd end up dead anyway. So it's like, I gotta handle this on my own to make sure it doesn't get to that route, because I think, maybe he felt like if he told them, it would make it that much realer or something like that. But I guess for him, it's like, no one would have really listened to it. It was a complex situation, but it's like, because he was so intent on handling it himself. Like, he was even an asshole to Luther. Luther's like, the fact of the matter is, I know you think you're better now. He's like, no, I don't think, I know I am. It's like, because it's like he pushed people away just because, I guess for him, it's also like, he lived on his own for so long. Plus, he had to go through time killing people, which even he admitted, it's like, yeah, I don't like it. The fact of the matter is, I'm very good at it, but I got no actual pleasure out of it. But it was kind of neat when it was all said and done. Like, he had his moments, he could have been an asshole, but it's like, he made the deal with handlers, like, okay, I'll work for you, upper management and stuff like that, but make sure my family survives the apocalypse, Another element that kind of took me by surprise was the fact is that Klaus ended up time traveling. I didn't see that coming. I'm like, yo, what are we about to do with that? Apparently, he was only going for like a year. Well, he wasn't going that long, but like for him it had been a year, and I was like, wow. I was like, because I thought that whole point was going to be making him mature and stuff like that, which to a certain degree, I guess you could say, because he fell in love for the first time, found someone that was more important to him than himself. But at the same time, I feel like it also just pushed out, because it's like, well, for one, he was already like, kind of a little unhinged, all the drugs and stuff he took to kind of compensate for his powers. But then on top of that, he went to Vietnam and got PTSD. So it was like, geez, like, you can't catch a damn break, Klaus. And talking about breaks, let's not forget about Luther finding out, like, oh yeah, your dad sent you up to the moon for 4 years? Oh yeah, it was for nothing. And even he later on, when he was talking to Klaus, he's like, honestly, yeah, I did kind of handle that the wrong way. I should have actually burned them. And Klaus was like, really? That's your problem with that situation? Rather than kind of the fucked up thing you did to one of your children, it's like, oh, I should have burned the evidence that would have let him find out. But it's like, I guess for him, it's like he knew that Luther wanted to keep proving himself, so he wanted Luther to think he was actively working and stuff like that. Even though it was useless stuff, it's still, I guess in the long run, you can make the argument it did matter, because Luther spent all that time on the moon, and it's like, oh, lo and behold, what happened in the end? The moon was what ends up being the problem. And it's like, oh, that's fascinating. 5 also being the one behind the whole, like, Cha-Cha and Hazel being after each other, trying to kill each other. I also love that they wear those masks too. They never explain why, I guess, because it's like a lot of times they'll wear the mask and they'll just take them off. I guess it's just kind of like, oh, this cool stylistic thing, let's just kind of leave it at that. But it's that whole thing of what I was saying before, getting to it, like the whole, everything's kind of compound upon itself. Like, Vanya, you can make the argument, probably would have never gotten to the point that she did if their dad had never, locked her up, hidden the truth from everybody. But you can also say, like, Luther locking her up when Allison was like, no, let her out. Even Diego and Klaus are like, come on, dude. Like, it's scary. The fact of the matter, she's got these new powers. You can understand why it happened. But Luther was mainly reacting from the fact is that the person he loves most in the world got hurt. Like, when he was hugging her and everything, I was like, oh, this is going to be a dream, and it's going to make, Vanya reluctant to tell him the truth. But it's like, nope, that really happened. Like, the moment he started squeezing, I was like, she's going to wake up, and it's like, oh, no, that's really happening. That was kind of interesting. I mean, it's so interesting because it's like you would think out of anyone you would understand that situation better. But I mean, the fact of the matter is because it's like, yeah, she didn't have her entire childhood to learn her abilities. Her abilities are right there in front of her. She just learned about them, learned that so much of her life was a lie. You could have cut her a break. But once again, like I said, Luther trying to be the leader in everything, being number one in everything, just, it felt like he was doing the right thing. But to be fair, it was kind of selfish reasons why you were doing it. You didn't interpret it too much as her being a greater threat to everyone else. It's just the fact that she hurt Allison, and I think you just kind of wanted to punish her for that. No matter how apologetic she was and just how brokenhearted she was about it, It is kind of interesting because Five brought this up, but that's an answer we still have yet to actually get. How the hell did Reginald know the fact is that the apocalypse was coming before even he did? He only learned about it because of time travel, So how did Reginald do it? I'm assuming it has something to do with his backstory that we didn't really go too much into. But it's also interesting, too, because we don't know too much about Pogo. Pogo only talked about the fact is that Reginald saved his life and owed him. I mean, that's part of the reason why. It's like, he's my master, so I had no choice but to kind of do what he said. The whole, faking his death, making it seem like a murder so it'd be a mystery that unites everyone, when in actuality it's like, oh, no, he killed himself. Also, that whole monocle thing. I guess maybe that was like Diego's like one last middle finger to his dad. Like, I don't know what made him decide to do that. I get, because it's like, oh, dad always wore it, so maybe for him, it's like I said, maybe it's just kind of a piece of like, ha, F you, old man type of thing. I don't know. It's interesting because the entire season, like, Diego's throwing knives, but it does seem like if he threw anything else, the same thing would apply, but maybe not. I don't know. We didn't really see him throw anything else. No, I'm trying to think. No. Yeah, he only threw knives this season, so I don't know if the same thing would apply. Because at first I was like, oh, can you just, like, curve them or something? The crazy angles they were taking earlier on, I'm like, wait, what? It's just like, nope, anything he throws curves, like, just kind of hits the mark. It's actually kind of sad, like a lot of interesting changes between the day that didn't exist and the day that did exist. Because without Allison being there to comfort him after learning the truth, like Luther obviously went, got laid, had a whole bunch of drugs, drank. But the sad thing is him and Allison never had their dance, that like sweet, cute moment. Even the fact is that she was going to take him to go see, Claire, like all of that was undone, which is sad, and also the fact is, Klaus saw Dave, but he never saw Dave for the rest of the season after that, like, because he was never full, like every other time he was sober, the fact of the matter is it was something else pressing coming up, so he never had that moment of like, oh, he didn't even, like, the sad thing is that he never had that heart-to-heart with Diego, because even Diego being, well, Diego had said it earlier, but I thought it was kind of a powerful thing of like, at the very least, if you lose somebody, you can always see them. He was talking with him and Patch, Eudora, that he'd never be able to see her again. That was also crazy that he ended up getting arrested for that. It did seem like at the end, though, he did give the evidence to Beeman to prove his innocence, but it's like, oh yeah, Beeman gets that evidence just as the world is about to die, so it's just kind of interesting. We did see Cha-Cha and Hazel. Well, Cha-Cha was on a payphone before she got obliterated, and Agnes and Hazel got out just before things hit, which makes you wonder, like, where did they go? Because that was something I was always kind of like, oh, that would be sucky, because, like, with his power and everything, of time travel and everything, I was always worried that, like, Five would go back and rewind everything so things kind of changed a little bit. Because it's kind of interesting because it's kind of interesting how the episodes differ while they also stay the same. Like, the whole Hazel and Cha-Cha situation was exactly the same. Like, the episode where it's like, oh, the timeline that didn't exist, the day that didn't exist, we saw Cha-Cha's side of things. And with the other one, we saw, Hazel's side of things, which I thought was kind of fascinating how they, like, did it like that. And also him being the one that said, like, oh yeah, take each other out. That was kind of pretty ingenious. And I love they didn't find out until Handler told him. What's also interesting, too, like, every time she'd pop up, she'd freeze time. Like, I guess that's just part of the technology they have access to. I'm curious about the Commission, though. What time period are they from? Are they from, like, the far distant future? To be able to have the suitcases like they do, the time travel and stuff like that, they must be. But at what point in time did they decide, like, oh, we're going to go correct history like that, what is it that they 100% get out of it? Like, that's what I'm curious about. Like, how does this benefit them to do this? I guess for them, it's kind of like, oh, we're doing this for the greater good. Once again, that also depends on the higher management, the higher ups, because like whatever their whole deal is, that'll probably dictate a lot of that information about like why things kind of operate the way it does with the commission. It's also interesting too because this show does play into the whole aspect of, is it fate and destiny? That was kind of another thing too that kind of set it off in my mind. And I'm sitting here thinking about why Vanya was probably the one, because they show it to you twice and Five never pieced it together. Just because, and I guess that's the sad part of being like, oh yeah, your sister's kind of insignificant. Also later on when it came to like, she comes there with Harold, aka Leonard, being like, oh, wait, what? You're having this conversation. It's like, it's a family member. We'll tell you later. It's like, oh, you're having this moment now, but you never decide to just call me. It's like, at no point in time did anyone think, oh, we should call Vanya and tell her about the apocalypse. It's like, no, because they didn't feel it necessary. They didn't think about it. It's kind of the same thing with Five. At no point did he realize, wait, Klaus is here, Allison is here, Diego's here, Luther's here. Which one of your other siblings isn't there? But it never crossed his mind to even think about that. Maybe that's why he decided to go to her. Maybe he thought like, hey, she's not here. The fact is they were fighting a bad guy. I guess it's kind of the justification because he knew that they fought whoever it was that ended the world. So for him, it's like, oh, now if that's the case, then, you know, she was probably somewhere else, you know, away from the danger. Which also makes you wonder what happened to her in the future. I guess, you know, even with her powers and everything, she's not invulnerable. So like when things went to shit, you know, when the meteors came down and destroyed everything and everyone, even she was probably wiped out. So it's kind of interesting because Leonard's need for revenge ultimately led to destroying the world, and I'm wondering if he knew that, would have still gone down with it or not. It's kind of interesting when you're not and it's kind of something interesting that I've talked about recently with the reverse Flash on the Flash of like when you can't be the hero, you become the villain. Like look at, you know, Harold. I mean, him growing up the way he did. To be fair, it's like it's a whole bunch of nurture situations, or rather lack thereof nurture, that led him down the path that he went down. So I love when Klaus was trying to explain the whole Ben situation. Everyone was kind of like, okay, you're crazy. And he was like, the fact of the matter is, you know, it's like, you know, I tried to tell you, but you were too busy getting laid. That all happened. He's like, shut. And then Allison's like, wait, what? And he's like, I mean, to be fair, you know, she thought he was a furry and he was super like ridiculously high. And then like, you know, Luther's like, dude, shut up. And that lady walked over. It's like, oh, wouldn't your son rather hang out with us? You know, I'm sure you'd have to ask permission from your two dads. And Diego's like, dude, you telling Klaus, it's like, dude, you'd be the last dude I'd ever want to hook up with. You know what else is kind of an interesting thing I thought, and they never really explained it, but I kind of chalk it up to this, is when it's all said and done and, you know, Vanya goes to her, you know, concert. It's like, even in that state, if her power is crazy like that, where she kind of destroyed the home, killed Pago, like the fact is that she still went through with that. Even to the point she was leaving her apartment, she cut off the lights. I was like, that's such a small little thing to do. She's riding the bus there and everything. And in part of my mind, I'm like, okay, so I think that's probably just supposed to be like, she's driven by her impulses. Like what, like I said, what does she wanted more so than anything? To be special, to stand out, to be important, to kind of be noticed for the first time. And it's like her concert allows her for that. So I think that aspect of her subconsciously driving her powers, like it kind of puts, you know, it's kind of a driving force behind her, you know, powers and everything. So I think that's kind of fascinating. But I was so curious to see what, you know, Allison was going to do. She had the gun to the back of Vanya's head. I'm like, are you going to do it, dude? If it means saving a whole bunch of lives, like, what are you going to do? What she did, and Elsa was incredible. She fired the shot near her ear, deafening her. Like, I'm sure it might not be permanent. Maybe it is. I mean, especially at such close range, but it's like her power is all about hearing and resonating with sound. But if she can't hear it, she might not be resonated with it. To be fair, even without it, I mean, this is still early days for her power, so she probably needs to hear it, but eventually she might get to the point where she can resonate with it without. But it is kind of interesting turning any sound into a weapon. Even like that's how she busted out, because she used her own heartbeat sound to gather energy. That's pretty dope. And it's kind of like an almost unlimited power. Because even, you know, because most people's powers in this case don't have a limit. I think the only one who outright has a limit, I'm sure Ben's power's limit was the fact is of what ultimately ended up killing him. But you take someone like Five, who's like, he can only jump so many times before it kind of craps out on him. There's a limit to his. But I am curious though, when it's all said and done, is she permanently deaf, or is that just kind of like temp? I also love that it's like, oh, that worked, and then immediately the beam shut off and busted into the moon. I'm like, ooh. Well, But that's, once again, that's what I was saying. Like, maybe he knew in the long run. Maybe that's why he did. I don't know. I feel like he would have said that. But to be fair, he was trying to tell Klaus some other stuff, but Klaus came back to the real world. I also love that he met that little girl. Is that little girl supposed to be God? Because she's like, oh, I made everyone. She's like, honestly, I don't want you here because I don't really like you that much. She's like, to be fair, I don't really like me much either. I was also interested in that too. Like, the fact is, like, could he take objects and people with him when he time travel or used his powers? That being 5, because every time it came to using his powers, he never carried anything with him necessarily. Or to be, well, I guess the suitcase situation is a little different. That allows him to, but I think his powers never outright let him. Because like when he went to go grab Dolores, when, you know, Luther was holding her out the window, he teleported and left the gun. Well, not teleported, but I mean, I guess that is how teleportation works. I guess you break through like space, and that's how you travel. So I guess teleportation. They never really just outright call it that, but I guess that is technically all. Because I treated it as kind of a teleportation ability, but maybe it's more like he steps into the space, you know, and the fabric of space. He's able to just step through it, and kind of teleport, you know. But nevertheless. But he is trying to time travel with his family at the end. And I love that it is fluctuating with their ages too. They all go back to being kids. I'm like, yo, when they land, wherever they land, are they going to go back to being kids or what? Like, what time frame are they going to go to? Because I was thinking, like, are we going to go back all the way, kind of undo everything and go back to Vanya? And, like, you know, 5 going to go back and go, like, okay, guys. Because, like, he's only outright traveled to the past, like full on. Like, obviously is when he first got here. That's the only time he's full on traveled to the past. I mean, because he still hasn't 100% worked out the equation, I think. But yeah, like with the suitcase, he traveled back essentially a day. So large scale time travel like that, but it'd have to be probably like the right circumstances and everything. So I am curious though, like, if, you know, if this does get picked up for a second season, which I'm really hoping it does, is the fact is, what would happen, like, when they landed? Like, would they all be adults? Would they be kids for a while? Or would they all be kids and he'd, you know, 5 would go back to being, like, the old age that he was? The, 58-year-old or whatever? I'm curious about that, because the whole thing is that they're not going to give up on each other. Like, obviously Allison and the others are talking about, like, we need to fix, you know, Vanya, take her to somewhere that she can be fixed. So I'm curious to see how they'll go about that. Are they going to travel to a point in time where their dad is still alive and try and get him to fix Vanya? Like, he found like a Band-Aid, but his Band-Aid in actuality just made things much worse, you know? I mean, to be fair, like, he handled Vanya the same way he handled the rest of the family, but I guess you can make the argument his way was even crueler, because it's not only did she have her powers and everything, but to be fair, she was killing the nannies and stuff like that. So it's like, it was already there. I think her powers just naturally come with a little bit of a dark side, but maybe you can make the argument, it's like she was a child, children are a little more temperamental and stuff like that, so you can make that argument. So if given enough time to grow, she could control her powers, but maybe her powers would never be controlled because they are connected to her emotions. They go out of control. Obviously, she's going to go out of control and everything. So I don't know. It's just, it's kind of interesting to see what they're going to end up doing with that. Like, what the next challenge is. It's not just like what would be the next steps for them besides just trying to fix Vanya and saving the world. Like, obviously, like I said, like, the commission isn't going to just let them do that. To be fair, like, the commission's kind of like, I mean, at least Handler was kind of like, you can't change anything, so there's no point of even trying to fight, you know, but they're sure as hell not going to give up. And it is so interesting that they are together as a family. A lot of their issues are out there in the front, but who's to say, like, you know, picking up a second season where those issues would leave them, you know, like whether a lot of that would rise back up. It's also interesting too, because it's like not just all 5 of them, like all 6 of them, it's all 7 of them, because Ben is there too. And even as a ghost, I do like the fact is that he is with them. I guess, you know, even ghosts can time travel. To be fair, his situation is a little different because of Klaus's ability, he is more material, like he does have a more materialized form, so maybe that makes it a little different. Because it's interesting, even though he time traveled back to present day, he could still see Dave's ghost. So at the end, it works a little differently. I mean, Dave still died back then, and it's like, so his ghost would still be here on Earth waiting. Because it doesn't seem like there's a moving on thing. It's just kind of like, you're dead, you're a ghost, you're just constantly wondering. It seems like that's all there is to it. I don't know if there's like a whole like, oh, unfinished business and you move on. If it is, that has not been introduced so far, but maybe that's potentially a route they'll take Ben's story down going forward. It's definitely going to be interesting to see like how the siblings interact more, or like Ben, maybe it's going to get to the point where Klaus can actually make him more solid. It's going to be interesting to see what he can do, because like obviously Ben's kind of like his main offense now, but like what happens beyond that, Like, will he learn to summon other ghosts and use them as powers, like use their powers, even though Ben's kind of the case of being like, oh, I have powers, so it makes sense. Also love that, like, he was mainly tossing people around, except for one dude, you literally saw him tear him in half, and I was like, jeez. Also, what about Allison? Like, her vocal cords are messed up, but it's enough that, like, maybe she'll speak again, but, like, her powers are tied to her voice, too, so she might be kind of taken out of the equation, at the very least for now. But to be fair, time did kind of get rewound. They were all kids again, so maybe that was enough to heal Vanya's ears if they were, like, permanently damaged, and it might have been enough to heal Allison's throat, so, we'll see. I mean, we also saw Luther go back to like a normal body, but I doubt that's going, like I said, it's probably going to be like just part of the time travel, but they'll probably all pop back, because I doubt they're going to get rid of the whole aspect of Luther being like the big hulking dude that he is, like what happened to his body. I doubt they'll get rid of that, because obviously he returned to a kid. Like I said, it might be a situation they start off kids, but then eventually like something kicks in and boom, they go back to being adults, but we'll see. Like I said, I'd be so interested to see what they would do with the second season for this. Because most of the characters, at least like villain-wise and stuff like that, are kind of out of the picture. At the very least, Hazel's kicking around with Agnes somewhere. Maybe the commission would come after him. I don't know. But like I said, all the other stuff they included as well, like, the Beeman situation and the Cha-Cha. Like, it seems like Cha-Cha's probably just taken care of and stuff like that, just the way things kind of played out. It's kind of sad, like I said, because her and, Hazel, it's like, oh, they worked so well together, and just kind of like that relationship that they had. Kind of like, oh, man, we've been through so much together, and then, both of them not being able to pull the trigger when the time came on each other, so... That sounded dirty the way I just said that now. Maybe I'm just dirty for thinking it was dirty the way I just said that right now. Jeez, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said anything. I'm losing my damn mind. Sorry. And you know what I'm also sitting here thinking about too? The fact is that the commission has gone through such a point, like they're like, oh, the apocalypse needs to happen essentially, but it's like, I'm trying to think. I feel like they were alluding at, because like 5 was like, you could stop the apocalypse, but why won't you? It's kind of like it's a fixed point and everything. It's meant to happen. It's supposed to happen, but it's like, it don't seem like it is. It seems like it's a situation that, I mean, could you guys benefit from the apocalypse happening in some shape or form? Because the whole thing, like when 5 first met Handler, she was kind of like, it's the old world out, and then basically a new world has begun. So it's like, the commission must be connected to that new world. Like, things have to go down the apocalyptic route for them to benefit in some shape or form. What? I don't know. But really, that's all I want to talk about in this episode. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.